So again, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation, if you will, where we will be discussing what we do in this module for Mexican American English 2351. And we're fortunate that we have with us Carlos Flores. I never thought I would do something like this, actually teach a writer and have the writer in my classroom, which is what this is. And bienvenido, Carlos.
Thank you.
So I would like to begin, but first of all, by thanking those people who made this possible. The Dr. Carlene Sanchez, who is the interim chair of interdisciplinary studies at Austin Community College. They are the sponsors for this. I'd like to also thank the department chair of Composition and Literary Studies here at ACC, Dr. Wendy Lim. I want to thank Chris Stewart right up there from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, who is going to help us with the technology, make sure we don't mess it up. And I'd also like to thank Rachel Dayton for helping. She's an administrative assistant who has also helped Carlos with his paperwork. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. Different from what? Different from the first time Carlos Flores came to read for us when he was promoting his novel, Sex is a Political Condition, right?
Right.
Where he actually did a reading and we sat there and listened to him read. This time, actually, we're doing within the context of teaching a unit in Mexican American Studies. And therefore, I welcome all of you students who are here. I would encourage you to take notes, namely because what we discuss here today is going to really help you in writing your next paper. So right now what we're doing is we're doing studying the Mexican American novel. We are focused on just two writers, and that is Rodolfo Anaya and Carlos Nicolas Flores. And to begin with, let me do just a brief summary of how we're approaching this module, which is a short review. All right, and this will take about 5 minutes. X.J. Kennedy, we use his textbook sometimes, tells us that a novel, the modern novel, is a book-length story in prose, whose author attempts to create the sense that as we read, we experience actual life. I like that definition, especially when it says, as we read, we experience actual life. I suggest that one good way that the novel can help us experience as we read a sense, or give us a sense of actual life, is by studying the characters. In fact, I would suggest that the development of character is the driving force in a novel. And so linked to that, I did offer a video. I hope all of you have been able to see it. If not, it's in your module. A video on what I call the literary pathetic situation. And that literary pathetic situation has three main points, and that's what we're going to be focusing on during this hour, an hour and 10 minutes. First of all, you need a well-defined character, a character so well-defined, multidimensional, that we could probably know what not to get this character for his or her birthday. And that can only be developed in a novel, as one of you asked in your questions, because the novel has more space to develop that character. What's the second part? The second part is you take this character that is so well defined and you put this character in a specific situation. That situation is going to have at heart some sort of conflict. When we get the character in that situation, then that produces and creates an emotional, or should create an emotional response from the reader, from you who are reading the work. I think, and I certainly hope I'm right, that if we can respond emotionally to a character, an imaginary character, a character that's been invented by the writer, and if we can respond when that character is put into a situation, we could certainly respond to the actual experiences of a person, especially Mexican American, the Mexican American experience. I hope you're with me on this, because it's very, very important. In this Mexican American literature course, it's not just a matter of studying literature, which is designed primarily to entertain, but we're also trying to delve into the mysteries of human life, and in this case, to reading these characters and situations and how we respond. How does that somehow provide insights into the Mexican American experience? And that's mainly what we're doing in this module. And it'll be useful to understand those dynamics in order to be able to write a good paper. So today, what we're going to do, Carlos and I are going to try to do, is we're actually try to put this literary pathetic situation approach to two characters in the first chapter of his novel. Okay, we're going to try to take Nena as a character and Junior as a character, figure out what situation they're in by reading a little bit of the scene where it happens, and then Carlos and I will discuss as far as what emotions it creates and how it provides insight into the Mexican American condition, the Mexican American experience. So let me welcome Carlos Flores. Can you hear me, Carlos?
Yes, thank you very much.
Right.
Glad to be here.
Let me tell you a little bit about Carlos. Carlos taught English at Laredo Community College for over 30 years and then retired. He's retired now, devoted his time entirely to writing. But he has published extensively. His works appear in anthologies such as Cuentos Chicanos, University, is that UNM Press? University
Yes,
of what? Of
University of New Mexico.
right, University of Mexico Press. The Rio, north of the Rio Grande, the Mexican American Experience in Fiction, which I still have right here in my library. He was also published in Texas Short Fiction, A World in Itself, Ale Publications, Pieces of the Heart, Chronicle Books, Passing Through, an anthology of Southwestern writers, Santai Publishing, and many others that are listed in his biography, which I only have part of it. I'm sorry. But Carlos was also an award winner for several of his publications. For example, in 1990, his short story, Black and White, won second place in the Mesa Azul Review Fiction Contest. And another story that I read, Cantina del Gusanito, won first place in fiction in the UC Irvine Chicano Literary Latino Literary Prize Contest. He and his wife, Dora, also were instrumental in founding the South Texas Writing Project, and I remember being part of that as far as getting readers and writers to write and to read. He also, and this wasn't in his bio, he also, along with Dora, his wife, published the Revista Rio Bravo. Remember that, Carlos?
Yes.
the Revista Rio Bravo, in where it was early in the Chicano movement when they actually published a lot of writers like myself who weren't getting published anywhere else. His latest novel is Sex is a Political Condition, and he has also completed The Pillars of Creation. One is already published and the other one is Searching for a Home. Welcome, Carlos, and I'm going to ask you to do a brief synopsis of your novel, House on Hueco, and then we can start by discussing Nena in her condition. Bienvenido, hermano.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank both not only you, but Chris for helping us facilitate, also Austin Community College and your students, and a number of my friends, colleagues and friends of mine that I've invited. This is a very special opportunity for me. So what is this book about? Our House on Hueco. 10-year-old Junior is thrilled and a bit nervous about moving from an El Paso barrio to the house his father has purchased in an Anglo part of the town. His mother, Nena, who speaks only Spanish, is somewhat less thrilled, especially when she finds the family will be living in the subterráneo, a dark, unfinished basement, until the white family renting the house above moves out. As the ever-optimistic Pop works to improve the family's situation by adding an apartment to the back of the house, Junior and his little brother make friends with Tim and Kim, the children living above them. But soon tensions erupt between Junior's mother and Tim and Kim's parents, between Pop and co-workers at his new job, and between Tim and Boogie, Junior's friend from the barrio. And these conflicts shape Junior's relationship with family and friends and threaten the new world his father is striving to create.
Good. So the first thing that we wanted to do was, again, as we explore what I call the literary pathetic situation, we decided that you would tackle Nena in her situation, and I would go ahead and, as you requested, I will read from the second part of chapter 1, and that would be Junior and his situation. And let's see how that goes. So let's get started, Carlos. Let's see what you came up with on that.
Okay, so do I read the excerpt afterwards?
Yeah,
or
let's go ahead and read it.
do you know
Read
this?
it. Yeah, let's read it.
Okay, just 1 second. Excuse me.
And this is from chapter 1. That's all of the students have read chapter 1 already, I hope.
Okay, here goes. Tell me if you can hear me or if you cannot hear me, okay? Okay. Pop steered the pickup around the corner and parked it under a big tree with branches that hung over the street and spread a cool patch of shade over the truck. My brother Rafa rose on his knees and looked out the back window at me. I stood up in the bed and was holding on to the roof of the cab with one hand when something that smelled like a flower but was wet like a bug hit my face. I let go of the cab and stepped back. When I wiped the stuff off, my fingers turned purple. Some got on my mouth, sweet and purple, like nothing I've ever tasted, except when I eat blueberry ice cream. Eyes big as lollipops. Rafa, my 5-year-old brother, looked at me, laughed, and spoke to Mom. Pop's door, then Mom's, creaked open, and everyone climbed out. "What did you do?" asked Mom, standing on the curb in a green dress that covered her knees. Next to her stood Rafa, whose face was pretty as a girl's, just like Mom's, but with Pop's curly hair. Pop walked around to the front of the pickup. Walked around the front of the pickup. I pointed at the limbs. Something fell out of the tree. Mom's face was brown as Mexican sweetbread. "Es una mora." "What?" I said. "Un árbol de moras," she said. Pop, a handsome man with a mustache and mitt and brown eyes that flowed like honey in the sunlight, said, "Una fruta, Junior. Es un árbol de fruta." I jumped and landed on the grass. We joined Pop, who stood on the sidewalk with his hands on his hips and the biggest smile I'd ever seen on his face. We were finally at our new house after years of hearing Pop's promises and imagining a castle with a wall and maybe a moat around it like the ones in the comic books at the barbershop, but with its smooth, light brown brick walls, white wooden columns on a porch with a brick railing, and a swing hanging from two chains. The one-story house was more beautiful than a castle. It faced south toward Mexico. Pop turned to us and said in that weird Spanish of his, fast and all cut up like he couldn't pronounce the words right. Esta es nuestra casa, nuestra casa. Que casota, said Mom, her hand rising to her mouth in awe. Está hermosa. The lawn was elevated a few feet above the sidewalk. These steps connected the sidewalk to a small walkway that led to the second set of steps up to the porch. These steps weren't like the wooden stairs that took us to our small apartment in the barrio in South El Paso. Those squeaked under our feet, groaned at night when the wind blew hard, and were dangerous to climb when it snowed. No, these steps were like those at the post office downtown, gray and solid and made to last forever. Because we had never owned a house before and weren't from this part of the city, it was all new and strange and frightening. But I felt very proud of my father because he had kept his promise to buy us a house, a feeling as sweet and fresh as that purple stuff on my mouth. We climbed the steps and were halfway to the porch when Mom yelled, "Ay, Dios mío." I stopped. Mom's thick black hair flew around her eyes. "What have you done, Rico?" Some weird-looking kids walked out of the house and stood on the porch. Their hair was red as the sunrise. Their blue eyes set in faces so white they shone like onion skin, and their cheeks looked like as if they had been sprayed with red chile. The girl, who barely came up to the boy's shoulder, wore pigtails in a dress and a pink ribbon in her hair. The boy wore shorts and black shoes. Their lips were pink, and they looked like brother and sister. He looked about my age, 10, and she was maybe 6 or 7. "What have you done?" Mother asked in Spanish, glaring at Pop. "Who are these children? What are they doing here?" Patches of sweat broke out on Pop's forehead as he took Mom by the elbow and pushed her gently toward the right side of the house. "Nena, this way, Nena, por favor. I'll explain everything in a minute. Okay, I want you to see the backyard." Mom pushed Pop's hands away and stopped. "Gringos. What are these gringos doing in our house?" The two children did not move. Their eyes shimmered like blue flowers in sunlight. So that's who they were. The gringos we had heard so much about. Pop called them Los Americanos, but Mom called them gringos. I didn't know what it meant, only that's who they were. People very different from us. Mom was a Mexican, Papa Puerto Rican, and so we were not gringos. But somehow, even then, I knew that gringos were special. They owned a lot of things like the post office or the big stores downtown or the warehouse where Pop worked or the mountains with white letters painted on them or new cars or TVs. We still didn't own a TV.
Good reading.
What?
You should do an audiobook.
Thank you. I don't think I can, but thank you.
Right. All right. So if students were reading this, I would ask them to look at since they are reading it, I would, in formalistic analysis, we try to look at that scene. And if we're following the approach that I'm following, we could focus on anybody here, but we would like to focus on Nena. So what are the dimensions of character that we can get from Nena, the mother?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. The mother's characteristics. Her name is Nena. She's approximately in her late 20s because the kid is about 10. She's lower class, Mexican. She's a mother. She's a wife. No education. Barely speaks English. Family originally from Juarez, Mexico. And as the novel develops and as we see already at the beginning, she's ambivalent towards her husband. On the one hand, she's rebellious, and critical of him, but also she's submissive, cooperative, supportive. All of those are applicable or operational. I would hate to say she's just submissive. She holds her own against him, but she's also possessive and territorial. She distrusts all men, as we see later on. She distrusts Anglos and or is afraid of them. And above all, most important is that she's a center or the heart of the family. And it is from that then that she has what might be called, or what has been called, informal agency. Okay. And her main motivation, of course, is to protect her family.
What is informal agency?
Well, let's say informal agency, for example, is when you are head of the household. You're responsible for bills and contracts and making a living and that kind of stuff. You don't have that. That's the formal agency.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, are you asking me? Okay, the pathetic. You want me to answer the pathetic question situation?
Yeah. So we get a good sense of character. I'd be interesting if I could know what other characteristics students see in Nena, even if it's not possible now. I think that they should take notes in that, because once we start analyzing whatever we're going to analyze for the next paper, they will be required to do that. I get a very clear picture of her. I see how upset she is. So when Nena is put in what situation, especially from where you read, what situation is she are you, because you're the writer, this is great, man. What situation did you put her in? Okay,
here's the pathetic situation. Now, normally I generally use the word dramatic situation, which has other implications. It's more of a technical term. Okay, but what's a pathetic and or dramatic situation? Well, first of all, she's caught between the barrio and an Anglo-American neighborhood. Okay, along with that, she is caught between the lower class and the middle class. She's caught between Spanish and English, between poverty and the American dream, and therefore, of course, existentially between the basement and the house. That's her situation. So she's caught between, the promise of living in this house, but with the fact that she's going to have to, undergo the sacrifice to keep the house, because they cannot afford it. They're too poor to afford it, and that's what the father's figured out. Mm-hmm. And so, what do I see? I don't know. What I suppose the readers would see is, of course, they feel sympathy for her, they feel empathy, they feel sad, they're angry the way she is. Perhaps they identify with her anger, and finally, I think that they finally admire her.
Okay. All right. And as we look at this character in this situation, and we get all of these emotions, right? How does this provide some insights into the not sense of actual life, but the actual life of the Mexican American experience? How does it somehow provide some insight that maybe if I were from India and had never encountered the Mexican American experience, what insights might this literary situation, pathetic situation, provide, Carlos?
Okay, let me go ahead and jump ahead, and I'll read this reflection that I had. This could be very extensive. This could take the entire hour, to answer this question, but I'll just try to keep it as brief as I can. First of all, well, as you know, you and I and most Mexican Americans have indigenous blood, Indian blood. Our ancestor may have one time owned the land, okay, but now, especially on the Mexican-American border, we live on the margins, not only of the American dream, but of Western civilization. Some people might disagree with that, but that's one way of looking at it. And while some like Nena may be reluctant or afraid to assimilate, others like Pop are bent upon succeeding in America. In the 1950s, as well as today, thousands of families Mexican American otherwise, find themselves in this predicament or in this pathetic situation that is dramatized by the novel. Finally, the question I think that rises at the heart of my book is, and especially as we, are experiencing this highly polarized country or situation in this country, the question then, of course, can we in America overcome our many differences and survive as a country? That's a big question. And I have an answer for that, but I'll wait till the end to maybe provide it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's amazing. I should add, maybe I shouldn't, but I will anyway, that Carlos was my very first English teacher. Even if I look a little bit older than he does, straight out of Vietnam, I had the GI Bill and decided to spend some of the money and enrolled in one of his classes to get the money, from the GI Bill. But I was so inspired that actually I became an English professor. All right, so we're going to switch characters now. And then at the end, we are going to try to answer all of the questions that you all have. I see Christopher's there, Kimberly, I guess, Lisa, Maria, Stephanie, and I'm sure there's more that I can't see on the screen. You asked me to read this, so I will tackle then what he did with Nena. I'll tackle it with Junior. And to set up the scene for this, this is where Junior and his brother Rafa, who is only 5 years old, are asked to go and play outside. And for the first time, Junior meets the other little kids. I think they're Kim and Tim, correct?
Yes.
And he also gets a sense to see inside the house, right? So I'll try to read it and then we'll discuss it. A woman inside the house, I guess it was her mother, said, "Kim, come here." And Kim slid off the swing and opened the screen door. I couldn't believe what I saw. I couldn't believe what I saw. The living room floor was made of shiny dark brown wood, and in the wall facing Mr. Jones' house stood a fireplace with some logs in it, though they weren't burning. A glass-covered cabinet held books and magazines. A TV spoke with tiny people talking and moving around on a black and white screen. A nice long sofa stood next to the rocking chair. In the dining room beyond, shiny wooden legs held up a table covered with a white tablecloth. I couldn't believe this was ours. Pop must be lying. I could see why Mom was so upset. Tim sat on the swing and held a chain with his hand. "Are you going to live in our house?" said Tim. I didn't know what to say. They wanted to be friends and had asked us to play with them, but Mom's voice kept making a lot of noise in my head. "Gringos, what are those gringos doing in our house?" But Pop was right and Mom was wrong. Sometimes we must hide the truth to do great things. So I said to Tim, who sat on the swing, his blue eyes big as pieces of the desert sky, "We're going to live in the soterraneum." "What's that?" said Tim. "The basement." "Downstairs?" Tim made an ugly face. "What an awful place. It's like a dungeon." Chills went up and down my body like someone had dumped ice cold water on me. My face grew hot, my tongue was hard and dry as stone in the hot sun, and my stomach felt queasy. I didn't know what to say. Then I heard Pop's voice. I couldn't see him or Mom, but it sounded like they were walking back, still arguing in Spanish. Standing on the swing, Rafa held the chain with one hand and flew the airplane with the other. Tim slid from the swing and stood in front of me. Is something wrong? I still couldn't speak, as if an invisible hand grabbed my throat and squeezed it. I swallowed hard, and in the minute the sweet purple taste of the mulberry tree came back, my thoughts cleared. Like us, the gringos need a place to live. If it was okay with Pop, it was okay with me. We're going to live in the soterráneo, I said. But my father says that one day we'll live in your house. And that's just one scene with Junior. What is he doing here? He is now reacting not from the internal situation that was going on in the first part of the chapter, but now he's actually seeing the situation from an external source. And that is, not only does he get a chance to see the house, but he actually gets a chance to hear the other kids say, you're going to live in that, that awful place. So again, if we're going to sit and do an analysis of this scene, and mainly what character have we developed here, I just listed a few things here. He's 10 years old, right? He's in a new environment. He moved from the, what is it, south side to the north, Carlos?
Yes.
Right. I think this kid is extremely observant. I think he's a good kid. He's obedient to his mother and father. You know, they are our heroes. But one of the things that becomes very clear as we read what he says, or what he thinks, because remember, he's 10 years old. He doesn't have the language to express these feelings yet. It's up to the older narrator or to the writer to give him that voice. But we can see that he's perceptive. He's also very sensitive. You can always stop me, Carlos, if I'm going in the wrong direction.
No,
He's
go
also
ahead.
very sensitive. He trusts, depends on his parents, and here is the key to everything. That sometimes is a burden for some of us who grew up in poverty. He's aware. He is aware. And it's that awareness that sends him into this chilled, almost like water, that freezes him. And for the first time, at least here, he sees his situation. He sees, like Anaya says in Bless Mi Última, la tristeza de la vida, if you will. All right. What situation has this
Wait a
character?
minute, I have a few
Yes.
comments to make.
Yeah.
Okay, well, other things that obviously that are obvious are, of course, he's the narrator, and as you once said, he was a good boy. Moreover, he's a gentleman. Remember also, he's Rapa's older brother, so that gives him a certain place within the hierarchy of the family. You already said that he's aware of his surroundings, but also he's open to learning from Tim, which might generally be seen as he's open to learning from Anglos. He loves his mother, trusts his father. He's very loyal to his friend Boogie. And as you pointed out, he's also curious about his socioeconomic and ethnic surroundings, but it's a non-judgmental, innocent view of a child. You know, he's not going in there with a lot of ideology or theory or whatever. I mean, he's just looking around. You know, it's a very innocent, and there's certain things that come across that otherwise might not come across.
Right.
Okay, and then of course later on we see that it's very different from Tim and Boogie as well. Also, as we see here, we find out that dignity and self-respect, which I think he inherits from his father mainly, though maybe also from his mother, are vital.
Yeah, and I can see how these other dimensions of character we can get as we continue reading the novel, which
Right.
is so important that you should read the entire novel. I can see your point. I see that he's not responding to the fact that they're Anglos. He's responding to the fact that he sees his condition. He is able for the first time to compare.
Mhm.
Right. How does this then apply, or, as we read it and as we're studying how this pathetic situation applies to, let's say, the Mexican American experience? Well, I could name, as you said, an entire hour of things and how it applies. But one thing that stands out, class and Carlos, is that as a member of the Mexican American community and as a member of the Mexican American experience, especially in the 1950s, when I was growing up, it seems that seeing your oppression or seeing your social condition in comparison to others is really painful, right? If we were all poor and all living in a soterraneo, what the hell, you know? But the minute that we realize that others are not, then we get this comparison, and that is very painful, especially for those who have gone through it. And I suspect that it's etched somewhere in our conciencia and continues to affect us. So this is how we would apply this approach to studying an entire novel, which you can buy if you want to in Amazon. I just found out. And at this point, what I'd like to do is, it'll be so nice if we could see some faces up there. I don't know. I just saw a movie where the professor didn't want to turn on his camera because he thought he was obese. And I almost felt like doing that, but I said, the hell with it. This is me. I'd love to see some faces up there. I think we're seeing Adrian. Hey, can you hear me, Adrian? All right. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah. So if you don't have any more comments, Carlos, then maybe we should go straight to doing some questions from the students,
Sure.
and they might be able to if I read your name, you can tell me who you are, and I'll read. You provided so many questions that I'm going to be able to read only one of them, but I think that would be fun. You ready? Okay, so here is the first question, and I don't know if you're there, but you didn't want to give me your name, and that's okay. Se vale, as we say, and the question is, let me see. And the question is about where he says, if we consider the emotional responses of readers to your novel, Carlos, I don't know where Carlos is now, but he's there somewhere. If we consider the emotional responses of readers to your novel, how might the response differ if I am Anglo-American or African-American or Mexican-American? In other words, as we talk about the response to a pathetic situation, would it be different if I were from another race or another experience? What do you
Good
think?
question. Good question, which I've heard from other readers regarding that. And of course, first of all, I've heard from a lot of Mexican Americans. I live on the border, Laredo. Well, for Laredo right now, I'm living in San Ignacio, which is right about 15 minutes, or actually, I think 20 minutes south of Laredo on the border. I live right on the Rio Grande, right on the back of the Rio Grande. on the side of Rio Grande. So I see a lot of that around here. And a lot of my readers here have told me that they said, we have been through this. This is us. You know, in some cases, the experience has been identical, you know, trying to buy a house and then, you know, trying to get it and doing it like that, you know, making, you know, sacrifices. Okay, one. But I also heard from white people, okay? In fact, some of my most avid fans are some Anglo-American friends that I have, and they said, you know, this is us. This is what happened to us as well. Which of course is very, I don't know, inspiring, of course, to know that. And then, and therefore hearing that, I would assume that probably the same thing happens to a lot of other people. I mean, if, you know, coming from a disadvantaged background here, and listen, you know, Mexican Americans aren't the only one that have come from a disadvantaged background. I mean, if you go to, for example, the Irish during the potato famine, if you go to what happened to in East Europe, you know, to the Jews. I mean, it's endless. This is a universal situation. And so I'm very pleased to say then that the novel speaks to more than just Mexican Americans. I mean, my intent, of course, was just to try to reflect my own reality, but or the experience that my family had. But it's especially gratifying to know that thanks to literature, thanks to my mentors, other writers, namely, that I was able to, you know, do more than just that. That, you know, I was able to stay more, I mean, go beyond, you know, the limits of my own experience.
Okay, all right. So this one comes from Jolene. Are you there, Jolene Vasquez? Anywhere? There, hi. Jolene has several questions, but one of them was also asked by another student, but she's talking about symbolism. It seems that Sweet Purple, in your story, Sweet Purple, does the 10-year-old boy junior, I'm sorry, I got the wrong question here. In your story, Sweet Purple, does the 10-year-old boy junior resonate with you, or was this just a story you created? And there's a similar story question that I'll combine with that.
Okay.
And that was the question from, is it Frida or Freida?
It's Frida. I mean,
Okay,
it's pronounced
yeah.
wherever. Yeah, it's
Frida. I like
Frida.
Frida. All right.
Yeah.
So, Frida then would also like to know, I mean, if you remember the first question, which of the characters is most like you or someone, or like someone you know?
Well, let me answer that question in two ways. First of all, Junior obviously is the one who's more likely, I mean, to resemble me. So the question then becomes, am I Junior? And I would have to say yes and no. So what does that mean? Well, that means that, first of all, that the material that I used for the story does come from a background. You know, this is the story of how my father bought our first house in El Paso. So it is autobiographical in that regard. But what happens when you're writing fiction, especially when you write about yourself, or you use you model a character up to yourself, that model, that character changes. You know, it's no longer you, it becomes someone else. And that's why I say, you know, and even the dramatic situation takes on a life of its own. So now there are three categories, around three genres, literary genres we're talking about here. One is autobiography. That's not what it is. I didn't write an autobiography. Had I done that, it'd been completely different. Number two, it's not a memoir, which one editor told me it might be, and no, it's not that either, because I would have written it quite differently. And then finally, third, if it's anything, it is what is called, what do they call it? Autofiction or autobiographical fiction, which, by the way, has been central to most of the major, 20th century writers. And so that's part of my answer to you. What was the other part?
The other part was which character would be most like you, or like somebody you know.
Well, it would be obviously it would be Junior.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Why do I want to ask more on that? I don't know. All right. Okay. Here's another question, and that was the other question that one of you asked. Let me see. A lot of these have to do with the writing process, which leads me to believe that many of you are want to be writers at some point. It would be nice, or at least 3 of you would like to be. But the
Jose,
question, yeah,
ask me the one about the tree.
which one? Oh, the symbolism.
Yeah.
All right. One of you asked, maybe you can tell me who you are, because I'm searching for you. What was this? It seems that the color that the mulberry tree and the berries were present in at least as symbols in at least 3 of these in at least 3 times, which means they're important. Which one of you asked about how? Oh, that is Amanda. All right, so Amanda wanted to know the symbolism of the purples, and then another student wanted to know again, why is the casa so symbolic in Chicano literature? So those are 2 from 2 students here.
Okay. Be patient with me. Okay. The tree. When I first heard that question, I said, well, I really don't know. You know, there was a tree there, you know, when all this happened. So it was character. Okay. But the thing is this, look, when a writer writes, or at least when I write, you know, we're dealing at what is called, I guess would be called the unconscious level. It's almost like entering the dream life. And that's where you go, you know, and as in dreams, you know, the figures have all kinds of different meanings for us personally, emotionally. So my response was, on the one hand, I said, well, I really don't know. I suppose this part of just came out of, you know, my unconscious or whatever. But also later on, and I also answered this question, so well, maybe it's the tree of life. And then I went back and I said, okay, now I have a memory of that. What does this mean? All right. Well, I thought, of course, the tree of life, the tree in the Garden of Eden, the apple, et cetera, et cetera. Well, would that be relevant? I said, well, no, it would not be. The apple would not be analogous to the blueberry. So then I did a little bit of research, and this is what I found. Okay, that it's an archetype, fundamental, universal. And here's what I have to say. Or this is what my research showed me. Okay, the tree of life is a fundamental archetype in many of the world's mythological, religious, and philosophical traditions. As you know, Jose, that is part of the La Tradición Roja, which is, you know, the spiritual tradition of the indigenous people. You know, that's very basic, el árbol de la vida. And it is also closely related to the concept of the sacred tree. In other words, the concept of the tree of life may be originated in Central Asia and absorbed by other cultures such as Scandinavian mythology and Altai shamanism, not to mention, of course, you know, the indigenous mythologies of in the New World. I mean, in the Americas. Finally, the tree of knowledge, in other words, from the Bible, the biblical icon, is connecting to the heaven and the underworld, and the tree of life connecting all forms of creation, both forms of the world tree and the cosmic tree, and are portrayed in various religions and philosophies as the same tree. So, if you read it in that context, if you read it with that background, you know, you realize that it's an archetype. Not only was a tree there, you know, in front of the house, but you know, there are things, as Jung pointed out, you know, we have a collective unconscious, and we have these symbols that go back centuries, and we don't know where they come from. But it's that past knowledge that we've inherited unconsciously or consciously, you know, from past generations. To answer the second question, why the house? Well, I don't know about other Mexican-American or Latino writers. I suppose part of the answer would be, as you yourself pointed out, Jose, you know, is that many of us didn't. I mean, you know, for us having the first house is such a big achievement. You know, even with this lousy house, you know, I mean, for example, in your case, you know, farm workers, you know, did not have that. They were constantly on the move. So that might be one reason, one explanation. But in my case, it's probably maybe that. Well, for sure it's that, but it's also something else. And it's this, that it's a case of what is it? Authority? No, is it anxiety of influence, and then intertextuality. Okay, what does that mean? Well, let's say by anxiety of influence, I mean, the effects or the influence that other writers have on us. And so somehow or other we react to that interaction with writers, and then we respond in our own work. And that happened to me with, that happened to me with when I read, after reading Tomás Rivera as one of the early pioneers of Chicano literature, and after reading Y no se lo tragó la tierra, and the earth did not swallow him, where he has this one vignette in the middle of that little book where you have this kid underneath a house. And I said, wow, what is that? That's fascinating. Why am I so attracted by that? And then later on I found out it's because I knew that image very well. I had lived it. In other words, again, here's another example of how that kid's situation, produced a response in me. And so there was that. And then the other one is that, is that there's always intertextuality with your contemporaries. There's intertextuality between my book and Anaya's book, for example, which was also influential, and then of course there's some intertextuality between me and Sandra Cisneros' house on Mango Street. By the way, the story of how I ended up with my title, people ask me if I stole it, and I don't think I did. It was really, well, I don't want to go into all that. It's labor intensive. So that's what I have to answer to that.
Yeah. I think one of you can tell me who you are. You wanted to know something about the title. Are you there? You said that somehow that he or she found out that you changed the title, that there was you had a different title to begin with. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. And is Carlos Morton still there?
I don't know. But which one of you asked that question? You just send it to me. Okay.
But
well, that's
Carlos would know about that. That's why I assume, yeah, he's there. That's why he's asking that question. Well, originally I had a different title, and then the press said no, send us more, and they rejected my title. And in the original title that I proposed, the words mulberry tree was a very important part of the title. But they asked me, no, well, go ahead and give us a whole bunch of titles, and how many? Well, as many as you can. So I came up with 1,000 titles. Okay, I just rattled them off, and then I sent them up. And it turns out, that I was playing around with different titles, and I forgot to erase the one I didn't want to include, which is this one they chose.
Yeah.
So no, I didn't steal it from Sandra Cisneros, and even if I did, it would be okay, because there's no copyright on titles.
That's right. Okay, so if one of you wants to ask your own question, I'm sure that Christopher will let you in. But I see Levi there on the corner, and I don't know. Levi asked a really interesting question here. He wants to know several things, but we'll attempt one. What is the biggest risk you took as an author, and did it pay off? Carlos?
You mean with this book?
Well, I don't know. As a writer, what did you mean, Levi? As a writer?
I meant in general, but if it makes an easier question to answer in this book in particular.
With this book in particular?
Next person.
Well, first of all, I didn't want to write it. And I wanted to write something else. And it all came as a result of a conflict I had with my wife. And one day I got this rejection letter from, I don't know where it was, or an agent or an editor, about something else I had submitted to them. And I walked into the kitchen where she was, standing, and I said, guess what? I've been rejected. Now, when my wife is in the kitchen, I mean, that's serious business, because when she cooks, it's like going to war or battle. Pots and pans sound like it's hot, swords, and this and that, and it's scary. But anyway, I said, well, daughter, look, these guys rejected me. And she said, well, you know, I can understand why. And I wanted to blow up. And I said, what does this woman know anything about American literature or about what I'm trying to do? Nothing, right? But I had to listen. After all, you know, she's my wife, and there's nothing like peace at home, believe me. So she says, why don't you write something uplifting and inspiring and uplifting, she said. Something that, you know, will give people hope. So I said, oh my God. So that night I was lying in bed, you know, troubled. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate to get published, desperate to write something that was publishable. And then I thought about the day my father took us, you know, bought this house. And I thought, they want me to do something inspiring and uplifting. Okay, I'll do it. You know, if I'm going to claim my writer, I'm going to do it. So I did it and got published. I mean, just like that, no big deal. Texas Tech has been very good with me, you know what I mean? And then my wife says, well, I told you. And then after I wrote another novel called Sex is a Political Condition. That really upset her, but I'm not going to tell you about that one.
She hated it.
She threw it at me for crying out loud. I mean, I was lying down and we were in this hotel, and we were just getting back to Laredo. We had been out to Arizona, to an Indian reservation, and all kinds of interesting stuff. I said, finally, okay, we're doing great. Nothing great. She was reading the book also. So finally, she storms into the hotel room. I'm lying in my bed, in pajamas, by the way, reading the book, and boom, I look up, and what do I see? I see this white pigeon headed towards me, you know, with wings spread out, like, you know, like a pigeon's, you know, headed right towards. It was my book, you know, it was headed straight for my face. It missed me by an inch and landed, you know, against the wall and back. And she says, excuse me, ladies, this is shit. You're going to embarrass me. Everyone's going to think you're an idiot back in Laredo. And I could go on that. But anyway, so that's what happened with, I said, look, daughter, I don't want you to read any of my work anymore. Don't worry. You can't tell me to do that. I said, okay, I'm sorry. You know, I'm not telling you, but just in case, officially, you're not authorized to read anything that I write. So I'm not going to be sitting around being censored by you or anybody else anymore. So anyway, okay. Does that sound like a risk, Levy? I don't know.
Well, yeah. Listen, we can stay here as long as we want to, and anybody who has to leave, because we said it would end at 8. If not, I would like to continue asking questions. If not, Carlos said that I could send him some questions and he would respond, somehow get the responses to you. But this is from Shakira. Are you here somewhere? Shakira? Well, she wants to know, again, the writing process. Is it more difficult? Is the writing process more difficult to write a short story or a novel as far as the writing process? Obviously, there's one is longer than the other, but in other words, do you approach it with a different mindset?
Yes and no. The basic principles of composition when it comes to fiction are pretty much the same. They've been the same ever since Aristotle. There's been variations on that, especially in the postmodernist era, you know, with people like James Joyce and Franz Kafka and Marcel Proust and others, Virginia Woolf. But overall, the basic idea is the same. So those things you have to give in, such as, for example, beginning, middle, and end, you know, like a turning point, like a climax, that kind of stuff. You need to have setting, you have the character and all that. But the difference between writing a short story and writing a novel is that basically a novel is a collection of stories that are all interrelated. You understand what I'm saying? They're all these short stories are interrelated because you have the stories of all these characters coming together and interacting with each other. So not only must you coordinate each plot line of each story within itself, but you have to coordinate it with everything else that's going on around it. So yes, you have to do that. And and one of the big problems is this: is that if you write a novel, imagine going into, let's say, the mountains between. There are a bunch of mountains between here and Monterrey, for example, between where I live and Monterrey, which is south of us, about 150 miles. And there's a lot of curves in the mountains, a mountain road. It's very narrow. It can be very narrow at times. And there've been some horrible accidents with buses. I saw one time. And so what happens, and then there's the detours. So when you write our novel, it's like going on a mountain road, you know, and you're going in and out, you know, one curve after the other, and suddenly you might get off on a side road and end up lost. And that's happened to me. That happened to me one time. I had to throw away 360 pages that I couldn't use because I had messed it up because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Why didn't I know what I was doing? Because I still had not mastered how to do it at the short story level. That's what happened. Okay, one. Now, the other thing is this. The other difference is that if you mess up in a novel, then you have a lot of work to do. I mean, you have a lot of rewriting, a lot of restructuring. It's like trying to, you know, writing a novel is like the equivalent to, let's say, trying to build a multi-story apartment housing versus a house. You know, it's much easier to repair a house or you know, take care of problems with a house, whereas with the novel, you have a lot more to deal with. And so the risks are the same nature, but a different quantity and different complexity with the between the two genres.
Okay. So let me ask you just something that should have a brief response. And Lisa Tower wants to know that when you're in a situation like that, what advice do you have for folks who have writer's block?
Look, I know all about writer's block, and whenever I talk to beginning writers, you know, and I'm working with them because I belong to a writers group. What I tell them, I said, look, the first thing you need to learn to develop, if you're going to do this thing seriously, is you need to develop the discipline of a writer. What does that mean? And that means you set up a schedule, weekly schedule. You figure out what's convenient for you, and you stick to it. It takes time to develop it. It took me a long time to develop, especially when you're working. Okay, but today I'm able to. Today I'm able to write almost every day, 5 to 1,000 words a day, every morning. Sometimes that takes me about 2-3 hours. Sometimes it takes me 4 or 5 hours. Sometimes, like today, I realized I couldn't do much more because my mind was concentrating on what I was going to do today. I had to take notes. I had to prepare myself, you know, because I didn't want to, you know, waste a lot of time talking about the same things. But that's how you do it. You develop some discipline you write one. Okay, now, for example, you show up to your office and you don't know what to write about. Okay, just sit there and do something. You know, just take notes, you know, watch a video on the subject you write about, you know, but let's say you do an hour every day, invest the hour strictly in writing and nothing else. And then once you get into developing the discipline and the fluency, and acquire fluency meaning being able to fluency means many things, but one of the things it means is imagining a scene, for example, and characters and dialogue, and being able to knock it out. Full of errors and so forth, not perfect, it's going to need revision, but you're able to knock it out, you know, the ground floor, and then build from that. And it took me many years to be able to do that. I can do it now. I mean, right now I'm, and Christopher has been, you know, is my consultant. You know, we work closely together, and he's been watching me knock out this new novel that I'm doing. I'm already on page 400 and something, you know, and he asked me, how long is this going to be? I don't know, maybe 500, 600 pages. I don't know. I don't want to be too much longer than that, but it's, you know, tomorrow I already know what I'm going to write about. So once you develop the discipline, you acquire fluency, and also the thing is this, another thing to overcome is this, and this is at the bottom of writer's block, and that is the question, which is deadly, and it's this: maybe all this is a mistake. Maybe I was never meant to be a writer. Maybe I don't have talent. If you get hung up on that, you're going to stay hung up on that and not do anything. So you write come hell or high water. You show up for that hour where the angel shows up. Sometimes the angel of inspiration does not show up, but if you're there, one day it's going to show up and boom, it's going to happen.
Roxanne Weir, is that how you say? Well, she's there. I can't see her, but I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Connected to what you're saying, what research do you do before beginning a novel or a story? Do you go out and do research?
Well, the books that I've written have different processes, okay, as I grow on and become more mature as a writer, because writer's art can be very immature, by the way, even if they're published. But as I've matured, I've seen that that I've approached all my books differently. For example, Our House on Hueco, I thought I knew it pretty well, you know, until I realized I had to go back to El Paso and walk around and get some images refreshed in my mind. The research was minimal. On the other hand, Sex is a Political Condition, which is about, I don't know, 300-400 pages long. I submitted it to a literary contest in California, won third place, but because it was not first place, it was not published. I was very upset with that. And so when I got back, I took it into my, when I heard that, I walked into my bedroom and I laid down in bed. And I said, I'm not going to do anything. My father was right. I should never have been a writer. This is all bullshit. And I'm going to devote myself to what everybody else devotes themselves to. You know, all my neighbors around here, and that's watching TV. And that's it. No more eating and watching TV. But anyway, on the third day, I arose. And I went back into the back into my my office, and I opened the rejection letter, and I said, yeah, they're right. And then I said, okay, we're going to do this all over again. And so then I scheduled 4 trips, 3 to Mexico and 1 to Guatemala. And then I took off, you know, and trying to get all the imagery that I have in that book, you know. I had to see what it was like to cross from the border of, let's say, the southern border of Chiapas into the northern part of Guatemala. And it's a very small road. It's a dirt road you can cross on foot. And when you look around, it's almost like when you're approaching it, it's almost like you see the rumps, the green rumps of these bears lying side by side. That's the forest. You know, I had to get that image. So yeah, I had to do research for that. For my novel, Pillars of Creation, that was an experimental work. Research was minimal. Okay, on the other hand, another book that I wrote is called in Spanish, it's Crímenes Dantescos y Otros Cuentos de Horror Tex-Mex. In other words, Dante's Crimes and Other Tales of Mexico or Tex-Mex Horror. And with that, I did quite a bit of research, you know, on all kinds of stuff that's been going on the border. I mean, the assassinations, los secuestros or kidnappings and stuff like that. And then the current novel that I'm doing right now, which is called Cocula, I had to make a trip to, I had to invest about $1,000 or more to go spend a week first in Chihuahua, which I loved, fell in love with it. I've driven through there many times, but I had not really stayed there. And then I went to Parral, where they assassinated Pancho Villa, and I stood where they assassinated him. And I have all those images in my mind. And finally, I was able to get back to my novel, and boom, it took off, and I finished the second third. And then also that required another trip to Aguascalientes. I had to go to see a bullfight over there to try to be able to create the bullfight that I have in my book. Yes, you know, you'll find out. Oh, and I'm considering now, I'm already researching a new book. It's called tentatively, it's entitled, it's really a collection of stories or novelettes. It's entitled Confessions of a British Novelist Born in Texas. And it's about, I'm living right now in this.
And how is he British?
Huh?
If he was born in Texas, how is he British?
because that's his
Oh, wait a
delusion.
minute. I'm taking more time than I should because we only have about 10 minutes left. So
That's his delusion. You know, that's what he thinks
Okay.
he is. He isn't that, but I mean, you know,
se
I-
cree
that's-
mucho.
eh?
Nothing, man. Se cree mucho.
If you want to put it like that. No, right now, listen, I'm living in this little town, 500 people. 500 people. And if you come to my house and you step outside the house and go down the street, you would think you're in southern Mexico, Oaxaca. Or you might think you might in southern Spain. And then I've met all kinds of characters. It's amazing. You know, and right now I have I'm scheduling an interview of this the former sheriff of Zapata. And the last time I talked to him, he says, "Well, what can we?" I said, "I'm sure you have a lot of stories to tell me." I told him. He said, "Yep." This is all I can tell you is that corruption has come back big time after I stopped being sheriff. So we can talk about that. I said, "Oh, great, that's super."
Yeah.
Because only trouble is interesting.
Okay, let's see. We can cover at least 3 more questions.
Okay.
As I said, if anybody has to leave, that's so. Roberto Delgado is here somewhere, unless he left. Roberto wanted to know, and you can give me a brief response on this. How was El Paso during the Chicano and civil rights movement of the 1960s? Where was there anything going on in El Paso as far as el movimiento that you know about?
No. The only thing I knew is some of the precursors, some of the people that I met with that were anticipating one, but in terms of a real movimiento and any actions against the institutions, there were none until after I left.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's when Carlos Morton, who just showed up a little while ago, I don't know if he's still around, that's when he showed up. And later on, he told me that he himself did participate, for example, in storming the university and you know, confronting the deans about the lack of Chicano studies, et cetera, et cetera. But by then I had already been gone.
Yeah. Okay. So Francisco Donovan wants to know, you know, the kids you have Anglo kids, and then you in the story, and then you have adults. Are the kids interaction purposely included to depict the differences, the different worldviews between children and adults? In other words, as far as characters and as far as what we're discussing, are the kids there included to depict the different worldviews of children and adults?
Well, yes. Yes, I suppose that would be true. I wasn't thinking that way when I wrote it. I just said, okay, let's see if we can find something that I know of, that I can remember from my childhood. What was it like? And I found that it's the most effective because, you know, there's statements that you can make. There's like, for example, there's a friend of mine who read Sex is a Political Condition, and she says, after I finished reading it, I was depressed for a month. Okay. Then she read Our House on Hueco, and she says, that is your masterpiece. That's an excellent book. Because it's told from the point of view of a child. Okay, innocent. You know, how can you judge a kid? A kid thinks what he thinks, right? So there's a certain objectivity, there's a certain safety in writing from the point of view of a child that you don't have from writing from the point of view of an adult. And there's a certain liberty that comes with that, you know, I suppose I could write from the adult point of view, but you know, those aren't my fondest memories of El Paso.
Okay, I'm going to try to combine these last 3, Carlos. I think they're the last. One comes from Stephanie Torres. One comes from Amber Ruiz Castellan. And another one, I think, comes from Adrian Lopez. You're right there. See, nice bigote. I think it'll get white eventually, man. So,
I'm trying. One day I'll get there.
mucho cuidado, eh? Right. So generally what they want to know is who inspired you to become a writer? If you could name one Mexican American writer who inspired you, that would be great. And what were your difficulties in trying to publish? We can try to take those, and I think if I didn't cover all the questions, and I'm really sorry, but those three, what was your inspiration to become a writer? Is there a Mexican author that you can name that inspired you? And what are the problems that you had in trying to get published?
Okay, for me, it all began with a connection I had to literature which I made in high school, because in high school I was in really bad shape. I was severely depressed, a lot of stuff going on at home, and you know, after a while I just got so sick, you know, emotionally, psychologically, that I needed some way to make sense of what was going on in my life. And that's when a friend of mine turned me on to a great Russian writer named Fyodor Dostoevsky. The book I read was Crime and Punishment. After reading it, I said, wow, finally I see somebody who understands what the hell I'm going through in this book. And so then I said, if this is what literature has to offer me, you know, some way to make sense of the world, then this is what I want to devote my entire life to, just to studying that. It's worth it. And that is consistent with a comment that a guy named Rollo May, a 1950s, 1960s existential psychologist, said. And that is, I went to college and we took all these classes in psychology, only to graduate and find out that if I devoted all those years to studying the literature, I would have learned far more. Interesting remark. And I agree with that entirely. You know, that literature opens your eyes, or opened my eyes, you know, to many things. It gives you vision, it gives you eyes, it gives you memory, you know, and also gives you contrast with other realities. So that's where it all began. But then at one point, and then I started reading like a madman. I read this, I read that, I read that. By the time I was 18 years old, I had read, I don't know, I mean, compared to my students when I used to teach, I mean, they were, you know, when they graduated from high school, they were lucky if they read one book, for crying out loud. I had read already a bunch of them, you know, and classics, huge brick-sized books. So a point after I got through that, and I realized, and I enjoyed sounding smart. Oh God, I loved that. You know, I sounded smart. I sounded almost as smart as my Anglo-American peers that were really, really sharp, very well-educated guys. I mean, people. So finally in college, you know, I continued studying English and philosophy. And then one day I said, I want to talk to Dostoevsky. I want to have a conversation with Dostoevsky. And I asked myself, how the hell am I going to do that? He's dead. And so then I found out the way you do it is by writing a book. Okay. And so I said, okay, I want to do that. It took me many years to finally learn how to write, but I did. I think I did. And so that's what's kept me going. Now, in terms of writers, and then of course, I can mention all kinds of writers that have been influential.
How about Mexican-American writers?
I'm getting there. Okay, now more recently with the Mexican-American writers, these are the following, okay? First of all, Rodolfo Anaya, okay, that we already talked about. He was a friend of mine. And then of course, Jose Flores, who's a brilliant poet, lyricist, musician, and a number of other things, okay? And then after that, I went on to study other people that influenced me a great deal. Among Chicanos, it's Ron Arias, the Road to Manzunchale. There is Oscar Zeta Acosta, the autobiography of Brown Buffalo, and the Road to the Cockroach People. There is, of course, Luis Valdez and his plays. These were all very influential in my thinking. And you know, that's a hand, apart from I mentioned Tomas Rivera, he was another one, in a very minor way, but yet a significant way.
Yeah. And the third question was, you
publishing.
just like any other writer, we'll have a lot of problems getting published.
Right.
And that's why within the Chicano movement, we started the small presses.
Right.
Where we could publish. Anaya, for example, was published by a small press.
Right.
So just very briefly, what problems are these young writers expected to encounter?
Well, let me tell you very briefly what they told me. 1% of all writers in this country get published. Less than 1% of all writers get published. And Mexican Americans are, we're getting published in far more than we ever were. You know, not only Chicanos, but also, let's say Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Mexicans from Mexico and Latin American countries. A lot of women, a lot of LGBTQ people, etc. But still you're up against you're very, very, I mean, the field is crowded. It is very competitive. It's trendy. You know, one day they want to publish this, and then, you know, 2 days, a year later, no, forget it, we're bored, and then go on to something else. So that's why I tell you that if you're going to do this, you need to develop first and foremost the discipline of a writer. In other words, you're going to do it no matter what.
It's okay. So we're a little bit. Yeah, we're 20 minutes. This would have been a normal class time, folks, if you were meeting Mondays and Wednesdays. But we're going to very briefly revisit Stephanie Torres' last question is, what do you hope readers like us can take away from your story? And that's,
Well, I think the final message of my novel, you know, I asked, you know, the final message of my novel is that it is possible to struggle. It is possible to sacrifice. In fact, it's necessary. In fact, let me put it another way. The other day, I was telling my wife, there's nothing more that I love than to watch flowers in the wind. They bounce back and forth, you know, in beautiful ways, the leaves, the flowers. It's almost like they come alive. But if the wind were not there, you know, you wouldn't, I mean, they're like little animals, you know, and you want to speak to them like little dogs, you know, bouncing around, and, you know, and so our lives are like that. You know, if it weren't for the winds, if it weren't for the resistance, if it weren't for the struggles, you know, it just wouldn't be worthwhile, I think. I've overcome a lot. Believe me, I wish I had more time to tell you about my own personal life, you know, with regard to struggles with depression and despair and the search for God. You know, but the thing that has saved my life has been literature. It has been the love of literature. And what I've tried to convey in the story is that it is possible, even for unacknowledged people, small people, marginalized people, to live in dignity, to live with dignity.
well, thanks a lot, Carlos Flores, and thanks to the class for joining me. I'm really happy that even if many of you did it in the very, I may still have some questions here that are coming in right now. If you like Zooms, let me know. We could plan a few more. Just continue reading. You should be reading Bless Mi Ultima, and then we'll continue communicating. I think some of you may not even know that I have office hours. I do Zoom office hours every Wednesday, and if you want to, I can set up a special meeting with any of you. Muchas gracias and buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
All right. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.